Majority Report with Sam Cedar.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Cedar.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Cedar.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Monday, June 15th, 2020. My name is Sam Cedar. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps and steps and steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal, the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Geraldo Cadava, assistant professor of history at Northwestern University, on his book, The Hispanic Republican, The Shaping of an American Political Identity from Nixon to Trump. Meanwhile, huge victory for human rights. The Supreme Court of the United States rules that LGBT people are protected from job discrimination under the Civil Rights Act of 1964. This is huge. Meanwhile, corona cases spike across the Sun Belt. Trump reverses on Juneteenth as Tulsa wishes it had no rally as the local COVID cases surge. Meanwhile, in New York, Cuomo threatens to shut New York City down again because of all that partying. And de Blasio says to contact tracers, don't count protests in that tracing of COVID. Meanwhile, the Atlanta cop shooting of Rashard Brooks deemed a homicide. And the Republicans is or is not balking at ending qualified immunity for the cops. Meanwhile, SCOTUS lets California's state sanctuary law stand and refuses to hear challenges to gun restrictions. Donald Trump reverses the Obama ban on LGBTQ discrimination by healthcare providers. State polling looks good for Democrats in November, but local Republicans predicted Trump landslide. And finally, it wasn't Tiffany after all. In fact, it was the niece, as Donald Trump's niece will be publishing a tell-all book in days to come. All this and more on today's program, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the program. It's Monday. We made it through the weekend. Hopefully you did too. First off, let me just start by saying send my best wishes to Mindy. Those of you who are members who listen to the fun half of the program, maybe you listen to it live. You are, I imagine, aware of who Mindy is. She's one of our favorite callers. And apparently, over the weekend, she had a stroke in her eye. And according to one tweet I saw from her, that she is doing okay. She seems to have lost sight in one of her eyes. I don't know if that's permanent or not. But head over to Twitter, go to Mayday Mindy number 9, Mayday Mindy 9, and send her, well wishes. Mindy, I hope you recover quickly, and to 100%, but I'm glad it is not more serious than you've told us. So please, best wishes and recover quickly. And hopefully she'll be calling in soon to the program, and we'll get an update from her. But hang in there, Mindy. All right, we've got a lot to get to. We've got some fun news, but maybe we'll save that for another day because we have a fun guest that we're going to have on sometime this week. I'm pretty excited about that. Also, we've got a lot of things to get to. Supreme Court, there are about 7 cases that we have been waiting for the Supreme Court to announce. One regards Trump's financial records. One regards the constitutionality of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and its funding mechanism, which is divorced from Congress. They fund itself via fees from banks, which has left it at least somewhat autonomous from a Republican Congress that wants to destroy it. Obviously, when a Republican controls the executive branch, they can put someone like Mick Mulvaney in there and attack it that way, but structurally still protected. There's a case that we are anticipating on the question of DACA. There is a case about an abortion law in Louisiana that is clearly a trap law, but we're going to see if trap laws are now okay. Trap laws being laws that are specifically structured to make it almost impossible to get an abortion, if not in practice impossible. The court has ruled on this in the past, a case in Texas, but it's a different court now. There's also a case regarding faithless electors. That is in the context of the Electoral College. Can Electoral College voters cast their ballots for someone who did not win a majority of their state's popular vote? That's the question there. Religious exemption from discrimination suits. Just a question of whether if you claim that you're religious or pass some type of religious test, whether you can do things that are discriminatory and without any type of accountability. And the final one was one that we got a report on, or we got a ruling this morning. I mean, just moments before the show started. And, I have not had a chance to read into the decision, but it is a 6-3 decision. And the top line is this: the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Title VII, bars job discrimination because of sex and race, religion, I think marital status. And today, the Supreme Court found, and prior to this, understand that there was no protection, and this also exists in the context of housing, and I don't know if this decision involves housing as well. I got to look into that. It appears to be a job discrimination, but I'm not sure. I just haven't had a chance to read the whole thing, and we're going to talk obviously to an expert on this. But prior to this, and I don't think many people knew this, in the vast majority of at least half, I think, of the states in this country, you could be fired from your job because you were gay. Period. That was yesterday. Unless your state had a specific statute that said you cannot be fired because of your sexual orientation, you could be fired. If your boss finds out that you're gay and it's like, I don't like gay people, you're fired. Well, now there is a federal constitutional prohibition, or I should say a federal statutory prohibition, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prevents the firing of people because of their sexual orientation or whether they're transgender. So this is a big deal. This is a really big deal. It is, I don't even know how to absorb good news these days. But It's great news and worthy of celebration. Meanwhile, the Trump administration just 2 days ago, I think on Friday, reversed a ban that had been put in place by the Obama administration of healthcare providers discriminating against people because they're LGBTQ. In other words, in my religion, I don't believe that I believe that it's a sin to be gay, and I also am a doctor or I'm a pharmacist, and I refuse to treat this person. I don't care. I work in an ER, but I don't care that this person needs their insulin. Just not going to do it. And the Obama administration issued a ban on discrimination on those grounds by healthcare providers. Donald Trump has reversed it in an attempt to shore up his evangelical base. So there it is. But the good news is there is and it's unclear at this point, at least to me, how broad the implications of what the Supreme Court ruled in regards to the Civil Rights Act will be. It is hard to imagine that the Civil Rights Act says you can't discriminate based upon sexual orientation in the context of hiring or firing, but not in terms of housing or not in terms of providing people medical service. We will see. And we'll be talking to somebody about this Supreme Court case and others probably this week and probably again next week, depending on when these cases come out. So good day, at least for human rights in this. Let's take the good news. It's good. Just a couple of ad reads before we get to our guest. Every day you see me here, I've got 2 cups on my my desk now. One is just coffee, but the other is the matcha flavor from Liquid IV. Proper hydration, crucial for your immune system, can boost your immunity. Liquid IV has an easy, healthy solution for dehydration. Liquid IV has more vitamin C than an orange, has as much potassium as a banana. It's packed with vitamins B3, B5, B6, B12, vitamins that are known to help your body defend against infections and made effective through cellular transport technology. One serving of Liquid IV provides the same hydration as drinking 2 to 3 bottles of water alone. It's healthier than sugary sports drinks. There's no artificial flavors. There's no artificial preservatives. There's less sugar than an apple. Plus, Liquid IV is donating 2.3 million servings in response to COVID-19, with products being donated to hospitals, first responders, food banks, veterans, and active military. Look, they have ones that'll boost your immunity. They have ones that will provide better sleep. They have better workouts, better energy. For me, I mean, there's a bunch of different flavors, and I've tried them all, and I have all of them, and I use them, relatively regularly. But my go-to every day is the matcha. I don't know if you can see that it's green in there, but it's delicious energy drink, and it keeps me hydrated. Very important. Liquid IV is available nationwide at Target, Whole Foods, and Costco. Or you can get 25% off when you go to liquidiv.com and use the code MajorityRep at checkout. That's 25% off anything you order with promo code MajorityRep at liquidiv.com. Get better hydration today at liquidiv.com, promo code MajorityRep. You can also find them, like I said, at Target, Whole Foods, Costco. Also, remember, as we're starting to see infections rise in certain parts of the country, those places which have practiced proper social distancing and have been careful, things are going down. But for all our sakes, we need to avoid crowds these days. What if you need to go to the post office? What if you need postage to send out letters and packages? Stamps.com is here to help. Stamps.com, you can print postage on demand. You can skip the lines and crowds at the post office. You personally print official U.S. postage 24/7 for any letter, for any package, for any class of mail going anywhere. Then you just leave it for your mail carrier, just like you would with any other package for the mail. You schedule a free package pickup or drop it in a mailbox. No human contact required. Whether you're a small business sending invoices, an online seller shipping out products, you're working from home, you just need to mail stuff. You're stuck at home, you just need to mail stuff. Stamps.com can handle it with ease. Stamps.com, you get great discounts too. 5 cents off of every first class stamp, up to 62% off of shipping costs. And now Stamps.com also offers UPS services with discounts up to 62%. You won't even have to pay UPS residential surcharges. Right now, you get a special offer for our listeners. 4-week trial plus postage and a digital scale without any long-term commitment. Just go to Stamps.com, click on the microphone at the top of the homepage, and type in Majority Report. That's Stamps.com. Enter Majority Report. We will put links to both those ads in the show notes today and in the podcast description, the YouTube description, all of it. Let's play a quick video before we do. Look, this is childish. I'm going to say that right up front. Everybody knows Donald Trump is afraid of steps. So all this talk about how he had trouble drinking and how he's like tiptoeing down the steps, I don't think he's having some type of episode. I think the guy's nuts anyways. But I'm not a doctor. I don't know. I do know, very funny to watch Donald Trump so terrified of a ramp. Well, let's play this clip. I mean, because Brendan, Matt, help me out here. When Anthony Andemarick did the President Show, he kept making fun of the fact that Donald Trump is afraid of steps.
Right.
I mean, he's well known for that, right? Like he's nervous about stepping down. There was weird.
The famous hand holding with Theresa May comes to mind early on in his presidency.
And a lot of
the escalator started the whole thing. It was an escalator.
That's right.
That's true.
He's afraid. I never thought about that. Interesting. But here he is having to go down a ramp. And, the only thing that scares me is you remember when the story about him going into the bunker when there were protests came out, he has to come out the next day and basically tear gas and fire canisters at people and bullets covered with rubber at people as a way of making himself feel macho again. I hope that he doesn't respond in some type of way to make up for the fact of how like sort of feeble he seems here. We did not add that music.
The Vic Berger?
Yes. That music. And apparently he had trouble drinking a glass of water as he was forcing all these students to come back and listen to his commencement speech. I love the fact that he gave that commencement speech, and the only thing that people are aware of is the fact that he had to tiptoe down the ramp. That I really appreciate. I feel like we should play that just when we want to cheer ourselves up, although the SCOTUS decision is pretty good. All right. Well, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll be talking to Geraldo Cadava. He is a professor of history at Northwestern University, author of The Hispanic Republican, The Shaping of an American Political Identity from Nixon to Trump. We'll be right back after this. Matt, you going to play some music?
Sorry.
pleasure to welcome to the program Geraldo Cadava. He is an associate professor of history at Northwestern University and the author of the newly released The Hispanic Republican, The Shaping of an American Political Identity from Nixon to Trump. Geraldo, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Sam.
So let me just start with this, and then I guess we'll just start more or less with a couple of questions I had that just emanate out of the title. Hispanic versus Latino. Who and Latino, my understanding is Latino refers to people coming from Latin America. Hispanic refers to people who speak Spanish.
Sure.
Why Hispanic Republican as opposed to Latino Republican?
Well, you have asked the kind of central question in all of Latino history, who or what is a Latino or a Hispanic? So Hispanic is certainly the term preferred by Republicans. Republicans today are kind of okay with the term Latinos, like Trump's campaign team is called Latinos for Trump. So term shifts. I think you're right that Hispanic has had to do with spoken Spanish, but it also has to do with a kind of hearkening back to the Spanish Empire and a kind of reverence for and pride in Spanish heritage. I think that has something to do with it. It's still the term preferred by Hispanics or Latinos in particular areas, like New Mexico is the kind of classic example for embracing the term Hispanic or Hispano even. So part of it has to do with geography. Part of it has to do with updating terms to reflect the times. Part of it has to do with political sensibilities. And I would say that Hispanic is certainly the term preferred by Republicans. It's certainly the term that will get you into the least trouble if you apply it to them.
And is that different from Democrats?
I would say so. I mean, in the broadest of terms, again, it has to do with geography in some cases. So I think, Democratic Latinos or Hispanics might call themselves Hispanics in certain parts of the country. But I think broadly, I would feel comfortable saying that most Democrats refer to themselves as Latinos.
Okay.
Even embracing the term Latinx, which
right.
is the farthest from what Hispanic Republicans would do.
Okay, and so let me ask you, why start with Nixon as opposed to any other time?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the first two chapters are actually about the early efforts by the Eisenhower and Goldwater campaigns to recruit Hispanics, but it really takes off with the Nixon administration because he, during his re-election in 1972, is the first Republican candidate to win approximately 30 to 35% of the Hispanic vote, compared with all other Republican candidates who won in the single digits. And since 1972, the result for Republicans has been much closer to the 30 to 35% that Nixon has won than to the single digit support they won since then. So I really do think the Nixon administration is the kind of turning of the tide.
And it's actually not even the administration as much as it is the candidacy, right? I mean, the argument that you make in the book is that, or one of them is that the Hispanic, I guess, to the extent that there is a Hispanic relationship with the Republican Party, 1/3 of Hispanics, approximately, it changes, went from an affinity for the man in Nixon and Reagan into an affinity for the party. Let's start with what was it about Nixon and I guess Reagan, really? Those are the two Republicans we're talking about since Nixon. I mean, the first two after Nixon, including Nixon, I guess. What was it about them that built this relationship with the Hispanic voter?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot happening in the late 60s, early 70s. And, I'll start there and say that beginning in the early 1960s, African Americans are kind of fleeing from the Republican Party in droves after the Republican Party, and Barry Goldwater in particular, takes a strong stand against civil rights. And Nixon, his presidential campaigns, his reelection campaign, is very explicit about the fact that they need to replace those lost votes. And the demographic they turn to is Hispanics, first and foremost. So that's happening. The other thing I think that's going on is that Nixon and Reagan have these Western identities, and they claim familiarity with the Mexican American community in California in particular as the basis of their outreach to Hispanics nationally. And so, Nixon himself has this kind of origin story of growing up in the fields, the agricultural fields near Whittier, California, east of Los Angeles, and how he came into contact with Mexican Americans then. And Reagan has a very similar story. He's from Illinois, of course, but he spends kind of formative years in California and talks a lot in the late 60s and 70s about how, as the governor of California, he appointed more Mexican Americans to his gubernatorial administration than any of his 20th century predecessors. So what happens when Reagan starts to run for president in the the time he actually wins in the late 1970s, in the lead up to the 1980 election, is his Hispanic supporters start saying to other Hispanics as an effort to recruit them, we know that the Republican Party hasn't always supported our community's interests, but here you have this man, Ronald Reagan, a Western governor, the governor of California, who really stands for us and represents our interests. So why don't you take a look at him and vote for Reagan, the man, not the Republican Party? And that logic actually shifted by the early 21st century to supporting the Republican Party over individual candidates like Donald Trump.
Well, I mean, was the pitch just based upon Reagan is appointing Mexican Americans to positions out of California? I mean, was there material benefits that Reagan was providing? Or
That's
Nixon,
a great question.
Or Nixon, for that matter?
I think that was the basis of his pitch. That's how he got, say, Cubans in Florida or Puerto Ricans in New York to listen to the pitch that he has a long-standing familiarity with Hispanic communities. But yes, I mean, this is kind of my grandfather's story, actually. He served in the military, then retired, in the 1960s, worked at a golf course washing dishes and worked in silver mines, and then voted Democrat up until 1980, when for the first time he voted for Ronald Reagan, because at the time he was working as a silver miner in the Silver Bell mine in Arizona near Tucson. And Reagan was promising to put more money back into his biweekly paycheck because of tax cuts. So this is why my grandfather voted for a Republican for the first time. But then what interested me about my grandfather's experience is how he then kind of embraced the Republican Party wholesale in the years afterwards on everything from immigration control to welfare to you name it.
That's interesting. How much did, the story that I've always heard, and this I think probably came out of like the efforts for George W. Bush trying to build bridges in the Hispanic community, was that basically about social conservatism, that Hispanic Latino voters tended to be more socially conservative when it came to things like gender roles, like things like abortion, et cetera, et cetera. Is there any truth to that? I mean, or how much did that play? Because I don't know. I mean, I guess abortion becomes an issue in 1973, and I just wonder how much of that was actually in play, or how much of that was just more of a story.
Yeah, I think that's an important part of the story, but I don't think it's the only part of the story. I think that, the issue of abortion has become much more politicized in the fairly recent past, I'm thinking over the past couple of decades, than it was in the 1970s or early 80s. So I will say that, Nixon's pitch and Reagan's pitch to Hispanics had very little to do with abortion in particular. It did have to do with, broadly some sense of family values. But I think one thing I'm trying to do in my book is pay attention to these individual issues like abortion or religious values or family values, but I'm also trying to look at a bigger picture. When I was talking to colleagues, friends about the book I was writing, the first two things they always said were, well, you must be paying a lot of attention to Cubans and a lot of attention to Catholicism. And my answer was always like, yeah, well, that's part of it, but it's certainly not all of it. And I think that if you try to just put it in those boxes of Cuban exile politics or Catholicism, you're really missing a bigger picture, and it makes it seem like a complete surprise when someone like Trump wins 28, 29% of the Hispanic vote. So, I think Catholicism, Cuban exile politics, abortion, other social issues, that's part of it. But I think, some sense of U.S. Latin American relations more broadly has a lot to do with it. I think military service and patriotism has a lot to do with it. I think free enterprise and kind of pro-capitalism has a lot to do with it. So I think it's a kind of much more diverse and complicated history than just social values and social issues like abortion.
When did the dynamic, I mean, you described it in the context of your grandfather, but I know that's also sort of like, just illustrative of what you found, broadly speaking. When did that turn from we're voting for the guy despite the Republicans to we're voting for the Republicans despite the guy?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think a lot of it has to do with shifting debates about immigration in the 1990s. I think a lot of it has to do with the kind of rise of nativism within the Republican Party, even in the, earlier in the 1980s. I'm thinking about things like the founding of the group U.S. English, which was a national effort to try to pass a constitutional amendment to make English the official language of the United States. That was a group that had in fact spun out of John Tanton's Federation for American Immigration Reform, a kind of nativist zero population group based in Michigan, but which was also national. And then the rise of people like Pat Buchanan in the late 80s, but then he went on to run a fairly successful primary challenge to George H.W. Bush in 1992. So, I think the rise of nativism within the Republican Party, the move to the right of the Republican Party in the early 1990s on immigration and border control as an issue, that really forced Hispanic Republicans to justify their support for the Republican Party, their continued support for the Republican Party, despite the party's move on issues that many assumed really mattered to Hispanics.
But wait, so I'm confused. So like how, so they're interested in Reagan because of tax cuts? I mean, is that really, I mean, is that how does that track with, let's say, just Reagan, so-called Reagan Democrats? I mean, I think there's increasing evidence that at least a certain percentage of those Reagan Democrats were a function of, the long process of LBJ saying we're going to lose a certain percentage of the country. I think he said the South, but I recently, maybe a year ago, I can't remember the book. I can't. The book escapes me for a moment, but there was a fact in there that even as late as 2008, 50% of non-college educated whites did not perceived the Republican Party to the left of Democrats on race. And it wasn't until the election of Barack Obama that corrective. It was Identity Crisis, I think was the book.
Wow.
And so, I mean, I wonder like how much of is the phenomena of the Reagan Democrat distinct or consist, distinct or, like just running in parallel to increase Latino support? Or is it just is it distinct, or is it in some way related?
No, I think it does run parallel. I mean, I brought up taxes as the first issue that my grandpa, in recounting his movement toward the Republican Party, talks about. But I think there was a lot else going on with Reagan as well. I mean, he was the first Republican president to really win massive, widespread support from Cubans because of his strong, anti-communist posture. So even Jimmy Carter in 1976 won like 50% of the Cuban American vote in Florida, and Reagan in his two elections in 80 and 84 won 80, 90%. So he was the first Republican to really just sweep up in Florida. And that's part of it. That's in addition to the tax story. But, Reagan, even as this, nativism was rising within the Republican Party, he himself didn't go along with that. I mean, in his campaign in 1980, he called Mexico the closest ally of the United States. When he met with the Mexican president, Jose Lopez Portillo, he said he didn't think that there needed to be a border wall between the United States and Mexico. There needed to be more cooperation between the United States and Mexico and more exchange. So Mexican Americans didn't see him as someone who, was part of that nativist move within the Republican Party. And then he also advocated for the Immigration Reform and Control Act in 1986, which at the same time that it included kind of punitive measures like employer sanctions, it also led to the naturalization of 2 million Latin American immigrants. So I think Hispanic Republicans really supported that. So I mentioned taxes because it is most closely related to my grandfather's story, but I think there was a whole range of issues that he also supported statehood for Puerto Rico. I think that really spoke to Puerto Ricans as well. So it was a much broader phenomenon, I think.
I want to just put a pin in that because it's still sort of like, it's still unclear. Like all the things you just listed are almost diametrically opposed to what Donald Trump is doing. Right? Like, almost every single one of those things is almost violently diametrically opposed to what Donald Trump is doing. And yet, but before we get there, there was one other thing that, is while just sort of like temporally while we're talking about Reagan and we're talking about, is that you wrote that it's basically almost like a Republican tradition at this point to name the treasurer, not the Treasury Secretary, but the treasurer of the United States to be a Hispanic woman. What's the behind that?
Yeah, it's kind of amazing, isn't it? It's an interesting fact that the dollars that Americans carried around in their pockets in the 70s and 80s all had the signatures of Mexican American Republican women. And the first was during the Nixon years with Romana Acosta Bañuelos. The second was Catherine Ortega under Reagan. The third was Catalina Vázquez Villalpando under George H.W. Bush. So, the treasurer of the United States is a largely symbolic position. They sign the currency, oversee the mint, things like that. But it's in some ways it was also a symbolic appointment, and it was part of the Hispanic outreach effort, especially in the run-up to elections. And so the idea was that they would choose Hispanic Republican women who were kind of seen as leaders in their communities to essentially be surrogates. I mean, surrogates on the campaign trail for Republican presidents and presidential candidates. So they would, go and campaign, and in some cases they were given a lot of credit for really boosting the Hispanic Republican support for Republican presidential candidates in states like New Mexico or California. And so it was largely symbolic. It was seen as kind of helpful as a measure of recruiting Hispanic voters. And I would say in some ways it's kind of really symbolic of a Republican strategy with Hispanics. It's much more like top down, where you would have these leaders who would go into the communities and speak, and they would expect the example of these leaders to result in success at the ballot box.
Am I reading too much into it by like, I guess, theorizing that because a lot of these folks or their grandparents or their parents or their great grandparents came to the United States for economic reasons, right? I mean, this is the story of immigrants through that. The idea of seeing a Hispanic name on money had some type of, like, I don't know, a greater resonance. I mean, Donald Trump desperately wanted to sign all the checks. I mean, there's a reason why people want to do that.
Totally. Yeah, no doubt. I mean, so the thing that Romana Acosta Bañuelos would say over and over on the campaign trail, really, it's just they would tell narratives about their own personal experience. So over and over, she told stories on the campaign trail to newspaper reporters about how she entered the United States with 36 cents in her pocket. She started a tortilla factory with her aunt. They moved to East Los Angeles, and it eventually became one of the largest Mexican food distributors in the Southwest and in the United States. And that it's still open. So the company now is in, I believe, Gardena, California, and they still have hanging on the wall some of the original samples of dollar bills signed by the company's founder. So for sure, there is this pull yourself up by the bootstraps mentality that Republican presidents really wanted to tap into. I mean, part of what they liked about, part of what Nixon and his administration liked about Bañuelos is that she was a business owner. She started with nothing and, became a very successful businesswoman. After she started the tortilla company, she founded banks in East Los Angeles that served the Mexican-American community, some of the first Mexican-American owned banks in California. And then, during the Chicano movement, the kind of civil rights movement for Latinos, she was very much a non-radical. She wasn't arguing for the kind of liberation of the Southwest or reclaiming the Southwest for Mexico, as many other Chicanos were. And she wasn't kind of arguing for gender equality at all. She very much, talked about her role as a homemaker as well. So, I think all of these are signals that the administration wanted to send to the Hispanic community, and they thought that they had really chosen someone who could kind of represent the successful immigrant experience to other Hispanics. And I think that I spent a lot of time talking about Bañuelos, but I think that's more or less what they want to do with Ortega and Villalpando and Rosario Marin during the Bush 2 years as well. So for sure.
All right, I want to get to Joe Biden's outreach or lack of outreach in a moment. But getting back to Ronald Reagan gives a pathway for 2 million Mexican Americans or Latin American immigrants to citizenship. He you ticked out Puerto Rican independence. I mean, these are almost diametrically opposed to, and they are. I mean, Donald Trump doesn't. Never mind providing Puerto Rico independence. He won't even provide them any type of aid in the context of major natural disasters. They're pushing for the deportation of DACA recipients. This is how is it that Donald Trump can maintain almost the same percentage of voters, of Hispanic voters, when Reagan attracted them, presumably through these measures, and Donald Trump is running so contrary to them. And it's also, it's not like there's huge hue and cry out of the Republican Party, like, please stop doing this. I mean, how do you reconcile that? Yeah,
it is a big mystery, isn't it? And it's kind of amazing. And the explanation I came up with is a developing sense of loyalty to the party over individual candidates over a long period of time, because otherwise it's not explicable, really, right? I mean, on issue over issue after issue, political scientists find that Latinos kind of just skew liberal. And how is it then that approximately the same percentage of Hispanics support someone like Trump as supported George H.W. Bush, who was a Republican leader of a much different kind? So I'll tell you like one quick story about an interview I did with one Hispanic Republican leader in 2015, just right after Trump announced his candidacy. And at that point, they didn't love Donald Trump. He didn't love Donald Trump, but he said that even if I don't love Donald Trump personally, I'm not going to let one man ruin the movement that I and others have spent decades building. So that to me struck me, because it was exactly the opposite logic that Reagan's Hispanic campaign advisors used in the late 1970s. So that's kind of where I really came up with this idea about the shift that I'm trying to explain is the shift from man over party to party over man. So loyalty is one of the ways it just makes sense to me that Hispanic Republicans continue to support Republican candidates despite all of the changes within the Republican Party. So Puerto Ricans, for example, they still, the main issue for Puerto Rican Republicans on the island, and there is a Puerto Rican Republican Party on the island, and Puerto Rican Republicans in the United States is pushing for statehood. That has seemed like a possibility at earlier moments in the history that I write, like namely the George H.W. Bush administration, when George Bush the first kind of used his State of the Union address to vocally and personally support statehood for the island. And that really kind of set off a flurry of activity in San Juan and Washington to try to make it a reality. That's a whole other story. But now, you have a candidate who, now a president who was a candidate at the time, joked about how he would push to make Puerto Rico a state only if Puerto Rico could guarantee him 2 Republican senators. So, it's a dramatic shift in the Republican Party, yet the Puerto Rican Republicans, both on the island and the mainland, still have the territorial status of the island and the push to make it a state as their foremost goal. And I think that that's representative of the experience of a lot of Latinos, because they're really hanging on to these core issues like statehood or anti-communism or free enterprise. And no matter how much Trump slights them, I mean, on Twitter, in speeches, in
policy,
the beginning of his campaign. Yeah, go ahead.
In policy and in So let me ask you this: is there also a big age divide on these issues?
Yeah,
because it feels like there's a lot of people who are sort of that like I said, it took a long time for the Civil Rights Act to sort out, for a lot of people, like, what party they belong to. There was still this big tradition for in the South of, I'm Democrat because my daddy was a Democrat and his daddy was a Democrat. And then they wake up one day and they realize, like, wait a second, the Democrats aren't the Democrats that I remember, and the Republicans aren't the Republicans I remember. I mean, is that happening with Hispanic voters? Are when we talk about a Hispanic Republicans, are we talking about primarily people over the age of blank?
Yeah, I think that has a lot to do with it. The first thing I'll say is that this is a super interesting issue that is really important for the Latino electorate, for understanding the Latino electorate, that also still needs so much more attention in a kind of empirical, systematic, comprehensive way than it has gotten so far. So, you hear a lot of things about the Latino youth. First, it's Latino youth who are kind of really upping the Democrats' registration efforts. There's a great kind of project by PRI and the World's kind of radio network out of Boston, program out of Boston, that they have a program called Every 30 Seconds. And the idea is that every 30 seconds, a Latino turns 18 and is becoming eligible to vote, and that's going to be the thing that really shifts politics in the United States as the Latino population continues to grow. So there's a lot of attention to youth, but I don't think there are great kind of systematic studies. I think, things like, we know this anecdotally from even the Democratic primary, where it tended to be Latino youth who were driving support for Bernie Sanders, and kind of older Latinos who were still supporting Joe Biden. We also know stories about, from Florida, about how it's younger Cubans who are kind of tilting the Latino vote in Florida. I would add Puerto Ricans to that story as well. But even that is kind of like an anecdotal understanding of it, because of how Barack Obama did in 2008 and 2012. And then I should note that Donald Trump did better in 2016 in Florida among Latinos than Mitt Romney did in 2012. So things kind of moved back toward the Republican Party in 2016. And I've been really interested in this and have been doing some interviews with recent high school graduates from Southern Florida and talking to them about where their political understandings came from. And in many ways, they were shaped by their views have been shaped by their very conservative Latin American parents. And so they've embraced their parents' politics. So all of this is to say that it's a really important issue. I'm not as convinced as others seem to be that youth are going to skew things toward Democrats in a way that they haven't in earlier elections, but we'll see. I mean, anecdotal evidence suggests that they might.
All right, so let's talk about Joe Biden. Joe Biden, apparently, there was, I think it came out of his campaign that they said something to the effect of, like, we're just not worried about Hispanics or Latinos. I guess I don't know if that's the subtext of it, but the implication is that their strategy is less through the Southwest and more through the Midwestern industrial states. And so that's where their focus is. They're not worried about Arizona because they're going to win Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. I mean, I don't know. This is just what I've read. What's your take on this?
I haven't read that exact thing, but that would be a mistake, I think. I mean, I think especially now that it seems like Arizona really could be a possibility for not only Joe Biden and the reclaiming of the White House, but also in the Senate when the race between Mark Kelly and Martha McSally. And I think Latino voters, because they represent such an important part of the electorate there, are going to be really important to Arizona and to the Southwest as a whole. So I think that would be a mistake. I mean, I don't personally, I guess this is just my opinion in some way as an expert, as a historian, but not an expert as a political strategist today. I would say that it would be a mistake to exclusively focus on the Midwest as the territory that Democrats need to reclaim. I think there's a really important national fight to be had in the West, in the Southeast, and other places. So I think that it would be a mistake to kind of ignore Latino voters because, and other voters, I mean, all voters across the nation, because you think that the key battleground is going to be in the Midwest. I think, part of why this is important too is that we don't, Democrats shouldn't want a close election. We shouldn't want it to be electorally close because that makes it possible for Trump to contest the election and other things. They should try to, I think, really wage a national campaign.
I couldn't agree more. I wonder if the theory is simply, on some level, we're not going to convince. I mean, because it sort of sounds like, if somebody can say, I'm supporting Donald Trump because the Republican Party, I've invested, it's basically sunk costs, right? I've invested so much into this project, the Republicans, that I can't let go of it now. I mean, I remember interviewing a delegate at the RNC in 2004. He was, almost, it seemed to me, in the room in Madison Square Garden somewhat, I don't want to say famous, but a celebrity, because he was, people pointed to him from from various states. I was looking for a gay Republican who could explain to me at a time where where George Bush was, pushing for an amendment to prevent gay people from marrying. Like literally, they're like, I think there's somebody in California you could talk to. As I was holding up a sign, I went and I spoke to the guy, and I think he was probably in his mid 60s, and he almost started crying as I was talking to him about it. Like he said, if I leave the party, I was asking him, I don't know how you can stay in a party that literally is trying to write you into the Constitution as second-class citizen. And he said, if I leave the party, who's here to reform it from the inside? And I'm like, yeah, I guess so. But maybe that's not the way that this is going to get reformed.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, totally.
I mean,
totally.
How do you convince, let me put it this way. How do you convince somebody who's holding white-knuckled onto this part of their identity, right? That they're a Republican. We have invested all this money into, or time or resources or energy or emotion into changing, the Republican Party. And I am a Republican chair of my county, whatever it is, because, how do you convince those people? Or do you just basically say, we got to write that off and look for our votes other places?
No, I think this is where also, difference between national messaging from the president differs from what's happening on the ground in particular places. I mean, Latinos in Florida are being told by the RNC that they really matter to the party, even as Donald Trump is sending very mixed messages about how much they matter. The same thing happens in Puerto Rico, where the party leaders of the Republican Party in Puerto Rico are, waging campaigns in all the states because they participate in primary elections, but they don't participate in the general election. So the way that they exert some measure of national influence is by literally getting on planes and going to Nebraska or Florida or New York and kind of lobbying for their issues at the state level when they don't think they're getting a warm national reception. So I think part of it has to do with the difference between national messaging and kind of statewide messaging. And, Trump, I think, is as we've known all along. I mean, he's paying much more attention to how his base feels than how, the broader Republican coalition feels. But then that's where you have, I mean, the White House even today, I mean, they haven't given up on Latinos in any way. I mean, they have people who work in the Office of Public Liaison who still today are putting together, conference calls for Latino business owners to talk about how Donald Trump is the one who's really fighting for them to kind of get them through this difficult pandemic time. And Donald Trump, through the Small Business Administration, has done more for them than any other president in history. So I don't think they've given up on this electorate at all. I think they've, been hard pressed sometimes to defend some of the national leaders' statements, but I think that they would still try to convince Latinos that it's the Republican Party that is representing their interests. I mean, the RNC has been doing this for decades explicitly, where they've been paying workers to show up to Latino events across the country and talk about how it's the Republican Party that supports or that will, help them buy homes or help them raise their wages. Yeah, all of these kinds of things.
I imagine Mike Garcia in California's 25th district, who Katie Hill's old seat, is an example of that on some level. Just just because we are maybe days away from getting a Supreme Court ruling on DACA, what is the perspective of I vacillate between thinking, maybe broadly speaking, the political, I guess, conventional wisdom that Latinos and Hispanics, necessarily weigh immigration issues as like a primary concern is maybe, a mistake, and is maybe in and of itself a little bit, I don't want to say bigoted, but a little bit presumptuous. But something like DACA, just seems to me to be the lowest hanging fruit for, for people in terms of like, these were kids who were brought here and who don't, they had no, there was no volition here. There was, and they don't know, in many instances, the countries that they would be deported to. How does a Hispanic Republican look at DACA?
Man, these are really, really excellent questions, Sam. And so it really does feel like the lowest hanging fruit, doesn't it? I mean, these aren't just children who were brought without a choice in the matter. I mean, they've become high school graduates, college graduates, PhDs, business owners, service men and women, all kinds of things. So they're Americans. They've been Americans their whole lives. They don't know anything else. So, I would say that DACA also has widespread support nationally among Democrats and Republicans. I mean, so I can't help but understand the president's opposition to DACA now, and his own position has shifted, and his own willingness to support it or not has shifted in the past 4 years. I mean, I just can't help but think that he's seeing everything right now through a very narrow electoral lens, and also making the wrong gamble in many cases. I mean, I think a gamble to oppose DACA now is only a gamble that has to do with really motivating. I hate to use the word base again, because that too is such an imprecise term, but that's the gamble he's making, I think. And, this is kind of what I was referring to when I was talking about how Hispanic Republicans over the past 25 years have been increasingly hard pressed to justify their continued support for Republican candidates. And I think it's only in the past 25 years when Hispanic Republicans have had to so vocally state that immigration is not the only issue we care about. And in surveys, it ranks maybe third, fourth, fifth behind education, behind jobs, behind healthcare. Then immigration is important. And that's always been true. I mean, Hispanics have always cared about other things besides or in addition to immigration. But I think the Hispanic Republicans have never had to state that so forcefully as they do now as a justification for their continued support.
Well, it's a fascinating question, and I have a feeling that we could talk again in another 10 or 15 years, and maybe we're at that point where, like, people wake up one day and go like, maybe it's not just Donald Trump, but it may take I don't know, may take Tom Cotton to be president before, to the extent that there's going to be some sort of change in perspective. But it might be, and I will say that over the past 50 years or so, ever since African Americans fled the Republican Party, Americans, Democrats in particular, have been kind of waiting for this similar moment when Latinos would finally decide that the Republican Party is not the party for them, and that they too would have the kind of mass exodus toward the Democratic Party that African Americans did in an earlier period. And it hasn't happened yet, but that is not to say that it won't happen in the future. Geraldo Cadava, Associate Professor of History, Northwestern University. The book is The Hispanic Republican, The Shaping of an American Political Identity from Nixon to Trump. Really interesting. Thank you so much for your time. We will put a link to that book at majority.fm. Thanks again.
Thanks for having me on.
All right, folks. I'm going to take a quick break. Head into the fun half of the program. Just a reminder, it is your support that makes this show possible. You can become a member today at jointhemajorityReport.com. When you do, you not only get the free show, free of commercials, but you also get the fun half. And you help us produce this show every day. So you can become a member, support the show, jointhemajorityReport.com. Also, don't forget, justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority, get 10% off. Our merch store is open, shop.majorityreportradio.com. The hoodies, the masks, the hat, the mugs, the bandanas, the t-shirts, the stickers, all of it. We're getting compliments on all of it. Go out and show your colors. And remember, the masks are all the proceeds. All of our proceeds go to supporting the Pacific Northwest West Immigration Rights organization. And so every time you buy a mask, these crew of lawyers and et cetera, in the Pacific Northwest, you're helping them do their job too, which is to help immigrants deal with the crap storm that is the United States immigration process and CPB and ICE and all of it. So check that out. And what else we got? Don't forget, tomorrow night, TMBS. You can find the Michael Brooks show on YouTube live tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Eastern. That's youtube.com, The Michael Brooks Show. You can sign up at Patreon, patreon.com/TMBS.
Yep. We have a guy.
Is it Chomsky on this week?
Yep, well, a guy named Noam Chomsky, who's very in demand these days. So we got him tomorrow.
A lot of people emailing him, I hear.
Exactly. I was one of them this morning.
Did you really?
I did, yeah.
Oh, my God.
He's very prompt.
He's going to be exhausted. Did he email you back?
Immediately afterwards, basically.
How does he do that?
I have no idea. He's a linguistics master, so.
I wonder if there's like a little bit of Andy Warhol going on here. Didn't Warhol just like have people like, reproducing his art for him at one point?
What if,
have you ever seen Warhol? No, it's not Warhol. I'm sorry.
How dare you?
I know. I got a mistake. There was another dude who was doing that.
No, Warhol was a vacuous dickhead, and Chomsky is a man of the people. So I strongly doubt that he would have people answering emails for him.
I was teasing, Jamie.
I don't even joke about that, Sam.
All right.
You triggered Jamie, Sam.
I did trigger Jamie. Also, check out Nomiki's show. You can find it at patreon.com. The Nomiki Show. Also, you can find it on YouTube, youtube.com. The Nomiki Show. And Jamie on the Antifada. What do you got this week?
Hello. So this week on the Antifada, we had our 100th episode, for which, just limping over the finish line on that one. We did our...
Is that the finish line?
Well, no, but, a milestone. Limping over the mile marker that's labeled 100 for 100 episodes. We did some analysis of the uprisings going on all over the country, talked about some of our own experiences in protests and marches recently, and that came out on Wednesday. Then on Friday, we had a free bonus. Normally, bonuses are for patrons, but we made this one free. We answered some questions from the listeners. Also, on Friday, we did a Twitch stream with the Lion Goes Down crew. That is Post Cyborg and Dicophrenic, our friends, our Lion Goes Down friends, wrote a really amazing analysis of the political economy of the COVID crisis. We talked about that and, how that ties in with the uprisings happening right now. And that is still up on Twitch for anybody who wants to watch it. Also next week or this week, like what week is what week? I don't even know anymore. But we've got an interview with someone reporting from the Chaz coming out, the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. So we can get a little on-the-ground reportage from that. And I also interviewed one of the people involved with the mutual aid hub that sprang up in Minneapolis with goods that may or may not have been liberated from Target. So check all that out, folks. Patreon.com/theantifada.
And Matt, what's happening on Literary Hangover?
Yesterday on twitch.tv/literary hangover, the first 8 chapters of James Fenimore Cooper's The Pilot, the 1824 novel, which was the first sea tale about John Paul Jones, a privateer who harassed British shipping, which made the British Navy fleet lose its sense of security. Anyway, we talked about that we listened to that while I played Assassin's Creed Rogue and did a bunch of pirate stuff in that game.
Great. All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break. Also, don't forget, check out the AM Quickie. Check that out, amquickie.com. We've got the IMs up. If you have the app at majorityapp.com, totally free. You can IM the show. And we have the calls up at 646-257-3920. I think we are all set for our journey into the fun half. Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
You know, I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous. You're a little bit upset. You're riled up.
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude. You want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
That's a good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457. 2, 38, 56, 27. 1/2. 5 eighths. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance, dance, dance.
Rand Paul.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're not paying.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
That guy might be a Nazi.
Agree.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way. Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook. Throw our hands up.
Ooh.
Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me,
Hey, shut up.
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
yes, ladies and gentlemen, we are back. Sam Cedar, the fun half of the program. Oh God, we have people calling in. We have people IMing in. Let's go right to the phones. Calling from a 610 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
It's Mike from Pennsylvania. How are you?
Mike from Pennsylvania. How are you?
Very good. I heard through the grapevine he wanted me to call in on, I think it was Wednesday, but I couldn't get to the phone on Friday. I'm sorry.
Do you remember what the grapevine said about why I wanted you to call?
Related to gerrymandering in Pennsylvania.
Oh, yeah. The question was, why is it, and actually I got an email about this, why is it that there was a lawsuit claiming that the congressional districts were drawn in such a way that was unconstitutional according to the Pennsylvania state constitution, and the Supreme Court found that it was, and so these districts had to be redrawn. But why is the state Senate districts, which my understanding are similarly drawn, I don't know if they're identical, why hasn't that happened?
So, I mean, from what I understand, there was already a case kind of contesting the districts when they were drawn originally. So, I mean, I don't know what the email said, but my understanding from talking to some people is that they feel like the case has already been decided, and it's one of those and that was under a court that was differently constituted. There was a huge scandal in Pennsylvania where a bunch of Republican Supreme Court judges were caught emailing like racist memes, stuff with like black people as monkeys and stuff like that. And so they had to resign. And that opened up a whole bunch of Supreme Court.
Just a Supreme Court justice, just a Supreme Court justice of a state, doing memes like that. Of course.
Yeah, they were also sending stuff like bestiality porn and things like that. So it's pretty, yeah. And they were also emailing like prosecutors, and it was pretty.
The email said to me that it was basically a question of they are waiting for the right case to bubble up. And I don't understand why there isn't an organization. I mean, certainly on the right, every case that has gutted the Voting Rights Act, every voting case is basically, I don't want to say manufactured, but certainly constructed. Maybe I do want to say manufactured, is constructed by a right-wing outfit. In fact, they did most of them. I can't remember what the name of it is, where they go in, they find a plaintiff. They find
Watch is one of them.
Yeah, they find the right plaintiff to bring a case that they have, sat down with people who understand, what courts have ruled what and what judges may be interested in what, and they find on a nationwide perspective, they find the right circuit in which to bring this case. Is there no one in Pennsylvania who's saying like, we got to find a plaintiff here to complain about the fact that they're not properly represented in the...
So what's amazing about this, Sam, is you could really have the Democratic Party do it. They could just find Democrats as voters to complain, right? That's the theory of the case that the League of Women Voters use when they challenge a congressional district. So it's not even, you don't even really need an outside organization. The Democratic Party could probably do it itself using these like voters. They would argue under the same law. So, I mean, I don't know what to tell you. The Democratic Party is incompetent, also very corrupt. In Pennsylvania as well. Speaking of that, this is not directly related to gerrymandering, but in my home city of Allentown, we just had a primary election where one of the centrist Dems was primaried by a progressive Hispanic woman, and the election is currently being disputed because apparently one of the election officials was observed bubbling in ballots right before putting them into the
bubbling in by, you mean like actually filling them out?
Correct.
Oh my God.
So the result was less than 50 votes separating the two candidates. The election official says, I was just filling in bubbles that weren't being read by the machine. I was just making sure it could read the machine, but they're doing it unilaterally without anybody seeing.
Yeah, it's a little dubious.
Yeah, a little bit dubious.
So if I hear you that maybe there has been less of a push on a statewide basis because there are incumbents who might not want to lose their seats.
Oh, yeah. That's the other part of it. So the gerrymandering that went on in Pennsylvania was aided and abetted by a lot of corporate Democrats who are at very safe seats in Philadelphia, and some locals in Allentown, some people in around the state. So they would kind of have their own personal fiefdom, so to speak. So like if you get a district that's 80% Democrat, right, and you have control of the machine, like Joseph Crowley, you think there's no chance I'm ever going to get primary,
right,
and I'll have my job, I'll have my pension, and no one could ever bother me, right? So you go along to get along. And also if you're like, talk about the type of person you're dealing with. They're like a charter school supporter, corporate Dem who, is opposed to inheritance taxes and wants to build business, work across the aisle. Like we know what these type of people are.
Right.
So, and they voted along with, so it actually got through pretty easily when they did the gerrymandering. In fact, with the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, when the Supreme Court ruled that the congressional districts were unconstitutionally gerrymandered, the Democratic Party plan for the new districts was actually worse for the Democratic Party than the neutral third party's plan.
Mike,
meaning that the Dems were expected to win less seats under the Democratic Party map than they were under the neutral map.
Here's my suggestion to you. Why don't you get on it? Why don't you find a plaintiff and do it?
Well, I mean, listen, it's I kind of have the AOC problem where like everybody in the Democratic Party of Pennsylvania knows who I am. You know what I mean? So whenever I do a thing, the centrists immediately rush in to try to like crush it.
Find a sock puppet.
Yeah, I need better sock puppets, obviously.
All right. So, well, we'll look for one for you.
Not to aggrandize myself. I'm not trying to say I'm the most.
No, I understand. I understand. Your reputation precedes you.
Yeah, my reputation.
All right. Well, Mike, I appreciate the call.
One thing, if I could plug myself, and also you, Sam.
Oh,
everybody should know there's twitch.tv/MAJORITYREPORT for an exciting other way of viewing Sam Cedar and the Majority Report.
Sure.
If you have problems with YouTube. And also you can hear more of me complaining every day, 2 p.m. Eastern, twitch.tv/central_committee. So
2 p.m. Eastern.
Come on over.
Why are you starting in the middle of our show?
You're scheduled to end at 2, Sam, just because you
2:30. We have not ended a show at 2 o'clock in, I don't know, like years at this point. We were
okay. Well, to be honest, it's about a 15-minute kind of like wind up where the show hasn't started. So 2:15.
Well, maybe you should do a 30-minute wind up. But Mike, I appreciate the call.
I've been on it. Sam, I always have a great time when I go on Mike from PA's Twitch.
At 2 o'clock?
Well, no, I'm usually working here at 2 o'clock, but
that's good to hear.
I'm not that good at multitasking.
Jamie's Zoom's not working. Oh, that's strange. She's on Mike's show right now. Calling from a 215 area code. Is this who I think it is?
Hi, Sam. How are you?
Mindy.
I'm alive.
Mindy, how are you? Oh my gosh. Are you okay?
I'm good. It was a really rough couple. I woke up on Friday morning at 6 o'clock and I couldn't see out of my right eye. And I said to my husband, I can't see out of my right eye. So I said, we have a hospital in Pennsylvania called Wills Eye Hospital. So I said, let's go to Wills Eye. But I made the mistake of calling my family doctor who told me to go to my local hospital. So my local hospital didn't know what the hell to do with me. So my local hospital made me an appointment to see an eye doctor later on in that day. So I lost 7.5 hours. So when I was driving to the eye doctor, the first eye doctor that didn't know what to do with me, he was sending me to a second eye doctor. And the second eye doctor, I said to my husband, I'm not going to him. Let's go to Wills Eye. So we just changed course and we went down and we went to Wills Eye. And within 5 minutes, I was in the stroke unit of Wills Eye Neuroscience Hospital at Jefferson, and I was coded stroke victim. So I had a stroke in my right eye so the reason why I'm calling and the reason why I tweeted about it, even though it was a personal situation, was because I have such a big platform on Twitter. I wanted other people, to know to never go to the local hospitals. You have to go to the majors. And also because it's so rare what I had that I want to see if other people had it. And a lot of people are responding and I'm getting some good advice and at least support. So because I went to my local hospital, if I would have gotten to the major hospital and they would have coded me as a stroke victim at that particular point, there was a drug they could have given me to reverse my damage and I could possibly be seeing now. But because I went and spent that 7 hours, I closed that window and I don't know if I will ever be able to see again because they couldn't give me the drug.
Oh.
Now, if I would have went to a different hospital, University of Pennsylvania Hospital, they have, which I wouldn't have went to because it wasn't an eye hospital. I didn't even think of that. But they have an oxygen chamber that within the first 24 hours, there's possible that they could reverse the damage or you could get part of your sight back. But what I want to say to you guys is, do not go to your local hospital. They're understaffed. They're underfunded. They don't know what the fuck they're doing. They're all loser doctors. I mean, sorry if anybody works in them. They have no clue what they're doing. You need to go to the majors. If you do anything more than a stitch in your finger, you need to go to the majors, because they are not equipped to handle you, and they are not equipped to diagnose you. And I don't want what happened to me to happen to somebody else, because in that 7.5 hours, I could have been stroking out all day long.
Yeah.
With and I could have lost my vision. I could, in my other eye, I could have been paralyzed. I could have and I'm still not out of the water, but I'm home and I'm good, and I was in really good hands. So, and last thing, I got the COVID test. Oh my God, it hurts so bad. They stick a swab that's like a foot long almost up your nose, and then it hits your brain, and then they twist it. And I don't have COVID. So.
All right. Well, that's good. Well, Mindy, I hope you feel much better. I think the other answer is that we need to fund local hospitals better, because I don't know that people have access to in the way that you do to the bigger hospitals, maybe based upon their geography or their finances, frankly. And so, but appreciate the.
Yeah,
thank you for calling in.
Thank you for the shout out. I really appreciate it. People are like blowing up my phone and Twitter, and I really appreciate it. It made me cry. Jay from Connecticut sent it to me, because I don't know where I was when your show first started, 5 minutes in, and I saw it, and I just was crying, and I love everybody, and I'm alive. And last thing, I was the only one in the ICU stroke unit that could talk, because all the other stroke people can't talk, and they couldn't wait to get rid of me, because I was like walking around the halls and I'm talking to everybody, and they weren't used to a Mindy.
Yes.
So.
Well, I'm sure they miss you now. But Mindy, I'm glad you're at least fairly healthy. I hope that your eye recovers, and I'm glad you called in.
Well, you can compensate with the other eye. I mean, it's only 3 days, and I'm kind of like starting to do it. You have to have sensors in your cars and shit like that. Like, I'm starting to realize I'm moving stuff around in my house. But other than that, I'm good. My husband's great. But do not go to any hospital if you have the opportunity, but the majors.
Okay.
It's imperative. Okay. Have a good day, Sam. Thank you so much.
Okay.
I love my family.
Feel better, Mindy.
I'm good.
Okay. We all love you. Thanks for calling in. Thanks for checking in with us. All right. Mayday Mindy number 9. Mayday Mindy 9. All right, let's listen to some sound. Donald Trump, there is reporting now. Well, okay. Let's start with this. So Donald Trump schedules a rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma on Juneteenth, which is the day that we celebrate essentially the end of legal slavery in the country. The last slave was emancipated in 1870, 1865. I don't know exactly when it was in Texas.
Asterisk, except for prison labor.
Except for prison labor.
It was 66, I think.
66. And of course, they hold it in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It is the 99th year anniversary of the Tulsa massacre, where dozens of black folk were killed, hundreds were injured, even more were sort of interned. It was Black Wall Street there, and they used private planes to drop fire bombs on people. I mean, it was horrible. The Trump administration, White House, campaigns, we had no idea. We just didn't check our calendars. And so they moved the Tulsa rally, despite the fact that the health department in Tulsa is saying, please don't do this here. We're having a spike. And for you idiots who don't know the difference between holding a political rally indoors and protests outside, there's a big difference. I mean, I don't know who, there's a big difference. And I also think that there's a difference, not medically, but in terms of the way that people make a risk assessment between protesting the police brutality and just holding a political rally. The urgency of those two things, I don't think, can be equated. I also think there's not an equivalence between the president holding a rally and the mass of people deciding on their own that they're going to hold a protest. Nevertheless, at the very least, we now know that it's a lie, that there was no awareness that it was Juneteenth, and that Tulsa had some import. Here is a report. Who is this? Lemire? Somebody reporting on Morning Joe this morning that, in fact, the campaign did know.
Has there been any thought of possibly doing what he did in Mobile, Alabama at the beginning of his 2016 campaign and holding an event outdoors?
Joe, we've done a lot of reporting on the backstory of this rally. First of all, just to be clear, campaign officials very much knew that it was Juneteenth when they selected that date. They expected some blowback. They were caught off guard by the intensity of it. The president eventually bowed to pressure and moved it from the 19th to the 20th, so it's Saturday. In terms of venue, no, not yet. It's an indoor arena. It's downtown. It must be noted, an arena that has canceled all of its events in June and in July because of the pandemic, because of health concerns. Yet they're reopening for this one night for this rally. The campaign has said they'll work with state health officials in terms of what sort of guidelines to implement. They haven't revealed those yet. We don't know if there's going to be social distancing. We don't know if there'll be masks, but the early sense is those things will not be required. People who were attending did have to sign a waiver to say they would not sue the campaign were they to get sick. There are outdoor venues in Tulsa. They could handle this. There's a new one that just opened up. It's a possibility they'll look to it, but at least right now they have not. The president wants to have as big a rally as possible indoors.
There you go. They could have an outdoor rally. They could mitigate the danger of COVID. They desperately don't want to. They don't want to because it's performative for them. They don't want to in any way concede the fact that this is real. And you see what's happening in Arizona. You see what's happening in California. See what's happening in Texas and in Florida. They just don't want to concede it. And so they're doing this.
Except in the legal waiver that people have to sign, of course.
Except in the legal waiver. But that's just a legal waiver. They probably have to sign an NDA. Exactly. The lawyers made us do it. Trump doesn't want us to sign this probably anyways, but the lawyers. That's what's going on there. I mean, it's unbelievable. So this false equivalence and this notion that, I guess we still need to debate. Does Donald Trump, is he racist or is he just have like a racist intent? It's so rude to say that they're racist. All he is doing is celebrating. I think that's what he said. We look at it as a celebration, Juneteenth. And the best place to celebrate it is at the location of one of the greatest racial massacres we've had in the country. It's not even a racial massacre. I mean, it's a massacre of black people. I'm trying to think of like, I don't know. I don't know what the equivalent is here. We're going to, I don't know what the equivalent is. I mean, it's just, I don't know. We have, it's just unbelievable. And the idea that it's wrong to call them racist. No, it's racist. It's racist. And I find it hard to believe that there aren't going to be at least some measure of supporters who are going like, well, whatever. We'll get over it. Not a big deal. I like how the idea they thought there would be some blowback. We just didn't realize it would be that much. People are a little sensitive right now. Here's Donald Trump. And maybe part of the reason why they didn't think there would be that much blowback when it comes to when it comes to Juneteenth and the Tulsa Trump rally is because Donald Trump, from his perspective, he's been the best president for Black people since at least Abraham Lincoln, maybe even, let's see. Here he is. This is that. Here's that interview with Harris Faulkner. Wonder if she even bats an eye when he says this.
All of that fit into talking with the protesters and people right now wanting for the Black community, and not just Blacks, but communities of color, people who are disadvantaged in general. I mean, the economy is the great unifier, right?
Well, I think I've done more for the Black community than any other president. And let's take a pass on Abraham Lincoln because he did good, although it's always questionable. You know, in other words, the end result.
Well, we are free, Mr. President.
But we
you
are
did
free.
Pretty well.
You understand what I mean?
Yeah, no,
so I'm going to take a pass on Abe, Honest Abe, as we call him.
But you say you've done more than anybody.
Well, look, criminal justice reform. Nobody else could have done it. I did it.
Honest Abe, as we call him. Did you know that, Jamie? Did you know that they called him Honest Abe? Were you aware of that?
Oh, yeah. I think I was.
Oh, because I thought Donald Trump had, he's done some deep research on Lincoln. And so he found out, and he was just letting everybody know, they called him Honest Abe. You know that, right? I mean, I don't know if you know that. He once was selling stuff to, at a store in Illinois and chased down, giving someone like a buck back on their change. Yeah, so he understands what's going on with Lincoln, and which is why you got to take him at his word for like some of it's questionable. He did some good stuff, but some of it's questionable.
Yeah, you can see the moment where he remembers that he's also simultaneously defending Confederate statues and bases named after Confederate generals as well.
Well, what is it that you think that he's saying? I mean, do you think this is what and of course, we're all projecting, right? Because we don't know what he's talking about, what's questionable. And he wasn't saying it's questionable whether I'm better than Abe Lincoln or not, because I'm putting him aside because there's so much controversy about Lincoln that I can't make a proper assessment whether I am better for Black people than Abe Lincoln, right? Maybe he doesn't realize about the Voting Rights Act or about, the Civil Rights Act or, all these things. He's an idiot. But I'm really curious what's in his head about Abe Lincoln that is questionable. And my guess is this right-wing narrative that maybe if Lincoln wasn't so bloodthirsty,
he's a tyrant.
He would have offered to buy the slaves' freedom, which incidentally he did. And was rejected. So, but that, and that may be giving Trump too much credit, right?
Definitely. I'm thinking about Trump going, I'm suspending habeas corpus. What a horrible thing to do.
Yeah.
Horrible.
I think the thing that is questionable in his mind, as always, is who was better for Black Americans, me or Honest Abe? That's as deeply as he's thought about it.
It's buried in a footnote by Eric Foner, Reconstruction. Just look, footnote chapter 8, footnote 74. It's there about the Honest Abe. And
a lot of people told him not to go to the theater that night. And then what happened? He wanted to see a play, and then Reconstruction was basically short-circuited. So
I heard
a lot of those judgment problem, but they did call him Honest Abe. I know that. Were you aware of that?
A lot of those actors were racists, I heard.
Hey, did you know Honest Abe was a Republican? A lot of people don't know that. A lot of people don't know that.
But I like people who didn't get assassinated.
Yeah, I like presidents who stick around for Reconstruction. Don't take the easy way out. I like how she said, oh, well, he did, we are free. And he goes, oh, yeah, no, we are free.
Dude, having to laugh along with that has got to be doing so much psychic damage to her.
Yeah, right? One would hope. Hey, we all remember, I imagine, when Larry Kudlow got on national television. Was it 5 months ago now? About 4 or 5 months ago. 5 months ago. February. It's not contained, but it's more or less contained, the COVID. It's not really going anywhere. We've done it. We've wrapped it up. We're moving ahead. Donald Trump, greatest economy in the history of ever. Need to cut more taxes, pro-growth policies. I know all, like, that's the only thing he says. Not going to be a financial crash in 2008. Things are looking great. I think he said that literally in August or July of 2008. Like days before Bear Stearns is like, collapses, and Lehman Brothers, they literally put chains on the front door of Lehman Brothers. Here he is. They'll still trot him out. I don't know who believes this. I don't know if it's just for Donald Trump's sake, but they will trot him out to tell everybody, blue skies ahead. Trust us to steer the economy, tax cuts, all going great.
These are relatively small bumps. They're there. I'm not denying it. You've got places like South Carolina, North Carolina, I believe Florida and Texas, some in California. Please don't forget, though, Arizona. We are testing at 100 times the rate we were a couple of months back in March. So you're bound to uncover a lot more cases. I think it's very important to note, however, with respect to the positivity and the new cases, the fatality rates remain very low. And in fact, nationwide, if you take a look at the case rates and you take a look at the fatality rates, they're still running basically around 0 to 1%, maybe slightly higher than 1% on a 1-day or a 7-day average. I do not want to downplay or argue against the fact that it's happening, but I think it's something we have to get used to.
We got to get used to it. We got to get used to it. You know what doesn't get impacted by the number of tests is the number of people in hospitals. So when that goes up, when more people go into the hospital because of coronavirus, when Arizona is literally near on the precipice of breaking, then it has nothing to do with testing. Nothing to do with testing whatsoever. It has to do with how sick people are getting. And yes, the death rate, we haven't seen a commensurate death rate yet, but that is because of how far out we are from all these states opening up post-Memorial Day. I mean, it's like clockwork, right? They tell you 14 days, you'll see the bump in cases. A couple more days, you'll see the bump in hospitalizations. Then we'll see the bump in deaths. That's what's going on. Going out there still, it's insanity. And let's be clear here too. There were two reasons why we all went into lockdown. One was to make sure that you did not bust through the capacity that hospitals and our medical system had to address how many ill people there would be. And in New York, just made it. Had to basically make the entire state do the equivalent of nationalizing the hospital system in New York State so that the governor had the ability to say, we're taking resources from Ithaca and we're bringing it to the city. We're taking resources from the city and we're sending it out to Elmira, whatever. I'm making up names, but that's basically what was done. And now in Arizona, they're about to hit that wall. We're going to start to see it, I imagine, in other states. Maybe it'll be South Carolina. Maybe it'll be North Carolina. Maybe it'll be Florida. We don't know. But the other point of this was to develop mechanisms to deal with coronavirus, with the understanding that we can't be in a permanent state of stay at home in the way that we were to flatten the curve. That we need 2 or 3 months. Now that we realize this is real, despite the fact that the federal government, the White House, the Trump administration was in total denial, assuming it would just go away, that we're going to build the capacity to do contact tracing, that we're going to build the capacity to have tests that are functioning, right? There's still an enormous amount of tests out there that people don't know if we can believe their findings. We don't have enough tests that are instantaneous. And so we have no way of mitigating a resurgence of this, or maybe the first surgence of it, because we haven't built any capacity to deal with it because we've been in total denial. They've got rid of the testing czar in the White House. It's unclear whether Trump has spoken to Fauci in weeks, maybe now close to month. They have completely moved on and pretended this doesn't exist to the point where they're going to hold an indoor rally in a place that is having a surge. It's insanity.
It's just a small bump, though.
Small bump. Look, I say buy. It's a great time to buy. Buy on the dip. If I could right now, I would go long, or I would go short on coronavirus. I don't think we're going to get the deaths that we want. I would be shorting refrigerated trucks right now. So, because I don't think they're going to be needed at all for the cadavers. No.
Now, the only small bumps Kudlow understands are the kind he does to go on television.
Boom.
Hey, that was good.
That was good.
Bop, bop, bop.
What do I got? I got to come up with a bell for that or something. That was good. Here is Larry Kudlow. Just to give you a sense of how psychotic things are in the White House. Trump doesn't need to do an indoor rally in Tulsa. He doesn't need to do a rally. But if he's desperate to do a rally, he shouldn't be doing it in Tulsa at this point, having associated it with Juneteenth. But he doesn't need to do an indoor one. But the indoor one gives him the feel that he wants. And it doesn't makes it seem like people are excited and it's packed. I really need that photo op again. But on top of which, they cannot in any way indicate that they're taking coronavirus seriously. Yeah, there's a little thing you got to sign for the lawyer. But here's Larry Kudlow. The old classic thing, like, they talk, they say one thing to this audience, they say another to another audience. Here's where it clashes right here. Larry Kudlow going on to CNN, totally responsible, totally taking this coronavirus serious, even though he thinks that we've got it contained again.
Had an increase. Now, remember, Jake, we are now testing at about 100 times the rate we were back in March when
some
the
of it's
pandemic
testing.
first exploded.
Some of it is absolutely from increased testing, but one of the issues is increased deaths and increased hospitalizations, and that's not from increased testing. But I'm glad to see you calling for people to wear masks, and I assume that also means at the Trump rally in Tulsa, people should be wearing masks at the Trump rally in Tulsa this Saturday.
Well, okay, probably so. I want to also say, though, that hospitalizations may be going up, but that's because elective procedures are now permitted. And maybe most importantly, Jake, although the case rate has increased a bit, we're not talking about a second round here. But
we hope not.
Fatality rates, Jake, continue to be very low. That's probably the ultra key metric.
I'll tell you something. First off, Jamie, you're wrong, because I don't think there's any evidence that he's taken a bump before he's going on there. I think he's actually, later in the day. That's what I think is going on. But with that said, here's a guy who's so terrified to promote the idea of mask wearing at this rally. It's stunning. Well, okay. And the idea that hospitalization rates are up because elective surgeries are up is an out and out 100% total lie. People don't go into the hospital and get listed as a COVID-19 patient because they're going in for elective surgery. That does not happen. That's not what goes on.
Yeah, I'm getting my rhinoplasty under the guise of COVID-19 severe case.
Exactly. Well, I wanted some collagen in my cheeks, and they wouldn't let me in unless I said I had COVID. So that's the way I got it. I needed to get my, my ACL, fixed. And so I just pretend I had COVID. It seems to be based right down here, doctor. God, man. And where's Jake Tapper pushing back on that? Wait a second. You're telling me that elective surgery is counted as COVID patients? I don't know why they let these people on to just lie constantly, unless they're going to point out that you're lying. Like, we invited you on here just to see how many lies you were going to tell. And thank you. You came through with flying colors.
Oh, Jake's a bootlicker. We all know this.
Let's have one more clip of Larry Kudlow on Jake Tapper's show. This is where he is very concerned, ladies and gentlemen. As you know, there's a ton of jobs opening up for people. Great paying jobs. Maybe you get to hand somebody their bag of food out on the street corner to them. And or maybe you get rehired, at the Best Buy. Who knows? But so much so that there's so many jobs out there and they need to be filled. But the problem is so many people are sitting around like fat cats, collecting unemployment, sometimes unemployment that might be marginally more compensation than their actual crappy job. And that's a problem, because we can't have the American people feeling like they aren't compelled to rush into what could be a dangerous situation for them by staying home.
Start right in. The federal government program for unemployed Americans gives them an extra $600 a week in benefits, but it's slated to run out in 6 weeks. And now, obviously, the health effects and economic effects are going to last longer than that. Should American families that are receiving these extra $600 checks right now expect that money to stop in August?
Well, unemployment benefits will not stop in August. What may well stop, and this reform is necessary. I mean, almost all businesses, frankly, on both sides of the aisle, or mostly both sides of the aisle, understand that the $600 plus up, that's above the state unemployment benefits that they will continue to receive, is in effect a disincentive. I mean, we're paying people not to work. It's better than their salaries would get. And that might have worked for the first couple of months. It'll end in late July. I think that returning to employment, we are, in the administration, the president is looking at a reform measure that will still provide some kind of bonus for returning to work, but it will not be as large, and it will create an incentive to work. You know, that goes along with the other incentives we've generated, the tax rebates, and most particularly, Jake, the PPP, the Payroll Protection Program, which I think was a huge success, $500 billion of forgivable loans. And that's what the May job report showed. 3 million people, surprised everybody. So we want people to go back to work. Temporary layoffs and furloughs can go back to work. That was in the job figures. Unemployment insurance, the weekly numbers, Jake, falling 10 consecutive weeks. So I think we are on our way. We are reopening, and businesses are coming back, and therefore the jobs are coming back. And we don't want to interfere with that process.
To be clear here, right? Like, the unemployment benefits at one point are going to run out. And it's unclear that there are jobs for these folks. And people have racked up all sorts of debt. And the idea that you want to incentivize people to go back to work in a time where we have coronavirus surging in maybe a third of the country, surging, unabated. And it's not, there's no reason to think that it's that those numbers are going to we're even at a plateau. This is we're just seeing now the implications of opening up in Memorial Day. I mean, the delusion here is unbelievable. And the sort of mask off moment of like, look, if we don't make people suffer, we in any way make their lives somewhat easier, they're not going to go back to their crappy jobs. And so, we wouldn't want that.
Or, jobs that are crappier than the ones they had before the COVID crisis, right?
Yeah.
Like, I was reading some analysis yesterday. I forget where it was, but the idea is by sort of imposing austerity on people, imposing workfare requirements on benefits, the government is forcing them to go to resort to taking terrible, precarious, low-paying, and often dangerous jobs. You know, anyone can get a job driving Uber, working for Postmates, Amazon, stacking bodies at the hospital. But, you know, absent the government machinations, people might not be willing to do that because these jobs are crappy. And it might be good for certain economic indicators in the short term. It might raise the stock of Amazon. It might raise the stock of Uber, but it's certainly not going to make people's lives any better.
Absolutely not. No, but that's secondary. Look, we got to be all part of the Trump economy. It's going great. Everything's going great. I'm not saying that there's, not going to be some bumps here with the surges of COVID, but, nuts. Let's go to the IMs. Colin from Nebraska. Sam, I attended my sister-in-law's wedding this past Friday. I was one of maybe 10 people wearing face masks. The MR mask, of course. Great to hear it. Including my family, out of a minimum of 250 people. Oh, Jesus. Masks were available in the church lobby next to the wedding gift money card table. I watched every single person look and walk right past them after dropping their gift. My wife suggested the ushers hand out masks at the door or in the pews, but the bride and mother said no to that. The priest didn't mention the masks, even said silly times when referring to COVID-19 once during the service. Thank God the sign of peace was not done. But the next day at brunch, my in-laws' house, I overheard someone mentioning to my father-in-law, a dentist, people wearing masks at the wedding and giving them shit, specifically me. And he said, good, give him shit. Unbelievable. Oy. Honestly, like,
I'm not sure if people should ever get married, let alone during a crisis like this.
Fair enough. But I guess my point is this, is like, I totally, it should go without saying, like, everyone I know, including myself, is losing their mind in this, in this environment. But the idea that, like, wearing a mask has become some type of, like, cultural signifier that you are a cuck, or that you are just like, it is the height of dementia. Like, how many times have we, like, said, like, idiocracy? But this is just beyond it.
It's crazy too when, like, there are now, like, demonstrable examples where wearing a mask has saved lives. There were two hairstylists in Missouri last week, I think, who tested positive for COVID. They didn't know weren't showing symptoms, but they wore masks, and none of their 140 clients ended up with COVID after the gestation period or whatever. It's crazy.
Yep. Alex JS45, I found your interview subject today deeply concerning because of its fundamental lack of theoretical understanding of the property of whiteness. It'd be really important for more people to read Noel Ignatiev's How the Irish Became White, to understand how whiteness is acquired by populations within the context of racial capitalism, and its privileges and requirement of service of racial capitalism are doled out service of it. The difference between what is by people of color?
Black, Indigenous, POC.
Okay. I see. Okay. Black, Indigenous, POC, and Latinos is that Latinos have within that population also its own system of whiteness and colorism that translates to America racial capitalism. Yeah, I was wondering about that in the context of Hispanic. I think that is when he talks about the idea of people sort of like, it reminded me a little bit of, in Australia, the idea of people who are sort of more aligned still today, or maybe 30 years ago when I was there, with their colonial roots, that associating yourself as Hispanic may, I don't know, I have not seen any research on this, may signify a relationship to whiteness that is, but I don't know.
Oh,
Trying to understand these issues through the simple lens of partisan politics is really myopic. You might say it's helpful to view supporting Republicans as an avatar of whiteness, but I think that's still simplistic. Also, why generational thinking like the demographic bombshell of Latino demographics is not coming true, because whiteness itself is changing as it's a reflection in party alignments. My family is white in Ecuador, but brown here, and it has created a lot of political schizophrenia here since they immigrated. Yeah, I think there's some validity to what you're talking about. It would be interesting. I think he's tracking, sort of a partisan relationship, but I do think that we're not getting the whole story unless we know people's relationship. I think it's embedded in that notion of Republican voters wanting to refer to themselves as Hispanic as opposed to Latino. That's my guess.
Ben Dominic, the Federalist hack and Meghan McCain's husband, tweeted out that he was a POC, and as evidence, he said there are streets in Cuba named after me, or streets in some Caribbean island. It's clearly his ancestors were colonizers.
Wow. A conquistador of color. There we go. I do recommend Noel Ignatieff. His work is amazing, and he died recently, and we really lost an important thinker on topics related to race.
Thanks for carrying the torch, Jamie, from Ghost of Valerie Solanas. Citizen XYZ, do you think Trump administration taking notes from Duterte's war against journalism in the Philippines? Maria Ressa, ABS, CBN. I mean, I don't know. Do they take notes?
Mm-hmm.
CBD Jazz Cigarette. Sam, how is ukulele treating you? Perhaps you can play the intermission music instead of Matt's bad, chopped, and screwed remixes. No, I'm not doing great on it. I'm doing my best, but I'm not great. I think I'm tone deaf. I really do. And I don't have any, I'm not particularly good with what do you call it? Rhythm either. So, Noah from Tampa. Why would Joe Biden?
That, you're great.
Other than that, I'm pretty good. Why would Joe Biden say anything about his stance on defund the police? It doesn't move any votes to say he doesn't believe in it. Like, why make it even slightly harder for the leftists to vote for you? He says, if he says nothing, it keeps the heat off of him for his role in the police state. It's just annoying. I don't know. Clyburn said the same thing. I mean, I think that they feel that the word scares off voters. Defund. A lot of times you hear people, I mean, I think even Bernie said, I'm not for defunding, but then went on to say, I am for moving funds out of the police into other institutions that can pick up, a bunch of the policing work. I think it's just that, like, the way that it communicates, to people, I think it scares politicians. I don't know what it does in terms of whether they're right or wrong about that, but.
Well, Biden is chasing suburban moderates, right? And they obviously still care about law and order. He's doing the same playbook that Bill Clinton did.
But Bernie isn't.
Yeah, well, Bernie might be a little behind on this issue as well. I hate to say it, but
I guess, I mean, and maybe Clyburn is too. I mean, I think like the idea is that they are afraid of it sounding to people like there is going to be no police there. And I think my guess is that there are more people who would support the idea of we're going to take certain functions, we're going to relieve police of certain functions and use that money that was spent on that and create alternative means in which to address these problems versus we're going to close up all the police stations and there not be any police. I mean, I'm not saying that defund means one thing or another, but I think that's what their perception is what it is.
Well, I mean, Biden wants to give the police more money. And Bernie also said that they should give the police more money. And we've seen this fail over and over. I mean, I think the two of them, Biden and Bernie, are probably operating within a different framework and saying this stuff for different reasons. But yeah,
I mean, I think, look, the flip side of this is that forget about what politicians are saying. In terms of the idea, the concept of it being out there, it, I think, creates more oxygen and more space to have more dramatic reform moves in terms of the police. They're out there afraid that people are buying into the idea of just shuttering police departments, all of them in a city or something. It gives more room for more reform, at least on a federal level. We got to remember most of this stuff has to happen on a local level, anyways. There's definitely things that the federal level can do to enhance it. But
I mean, there's messaging, and then there's what do we want our politics to be, right? What kind of world do we want to live in? And I think sometimes people get hung up on the messaging, which is not unimportant. But like when I'm trying to figure out what kind of politics I should have, what's a good idea, what kind of world do I want to live in, I'm not looking at the polls. I'm looking at data from experts like Alex Vitale. I'm looking at what leftists, people on the left, people on the black left have been saying about this topic for a really long time, and then work backwards from there.
Winnipeg Craig. It's a little dated now, but I wanted to share the numbers from Winnipeg's Black Lives Matter protest in March. In a city of 750,000 people, we had over 15,000 people in attendance. Another media estimate said as many as 20,000, so over 2% of the city. Disco Stew, am I being pessimistic and not being overly excited about the SCOTUS LGBT ruling because I'm expecting SCOTUS to give a huge carve-out to religious organizations to discriminate? I think you should be excited. I think you should allow yourself to be excited. I do think that what you're talking about is a concern. But even if you set aside religious organizations, I suspect you're right. I don't know how big that carve out's going to be, but this is a big deal. This is a big deal that people cannot be fired for being gay or trans. At the workplace. I mean, that's a big, big deal. And it seems to me that it is going to offer an opportunity in the future if there's a opportunity to have even a 5-4 center left versus center right Supreme Court to expand the areas in which you cannot discriminate against people for that. I think it's a big deal. Fellow masshole, I was literally about to send you a postcard to ask why you don't take IMs anymore. Also, you forgot to mention Jordan Peterson's birthday on Friday. Shofar? Nah, I probably will pass on that. Gigi Palin, I've been seeing some people now reporting the Chaz is now called the CHOP, Capitol Hill Organized Protest. Apparently, CHOP is already being mislabeled as the Capitol Hill Occupy Protest. But it is to be known that nothing is being occupied that wasn't already taxpayer owned. That the protest is in fact organized with goals. Also, the neighborhood Trader Joe's just closed its door indefinitely as retaliation for workers organizing for BLM and better working conditions. That store is always swamped. Business was booming, a disgusting corporate FU to the movement. Wow.
That does not surprise me. I have a friend who works at Trader Joe's here in New York City, and initially during this crisis, during the early part, they told them not to wear masks because it would freak out the customers.
Really cool. And Miami Cubans are insanely capitalistic. Until the 80s, Marielitos, they were all middle class fleeing Castro's revolution and horror. Yeah, that I knew. Speaking of masks, I appreciate Bill Burr, fellow Massachusetts senator, sir. Mass Hall. On Joe Rogan, also from Massachusetts, I guess. this is important, I think, at least in terms of like culturally telling people, like, you got to grow up. This is real. Coronavirus is real. And there's a minimum we can do that can have a significant impact on its transmission. So why wouldn't you do it? Here's Joe Rogan hosting Bill Burr.
You want people to walk down the street with a mask on?
Let's not start this, Joe.
Do you, though?
Let's not start this. Okay.
Let's start it.
I don't want to start this bullshit. I'm not going to sit here with no medical degree, listening to you with no medical degree, with an American flag behind you, smoking a cigar, acting like we know what's up better than the CDC. All I do is I watch the news once every 2 weeks. I'm like, mask or no mask? Still mask? All right, mask. That's all I give a fuck about.
There you go. That's the way you do it. If you all you need to know is that the top scientists in the country and the world at this point are suggesting masks. But even just contemplate, what is the cost of wearing a mask? It's annoying. It's annoying. It can be uncomfortable. It can, slightly inhibit your breathing when you're around other people. But I just don't understand the psychosis that goes involved in this. Once they get you to wear a mask, you know what happens then. Then they can get you to do anything. Where are these people when it's like no shoes, no shirt, no service? Where are those people? Why aren't they out there protesting? You're a cuck for wearing shoes into a restaurant, or you got to wear a shirt. You got to wear a shirt to go shopping. Excuse me. Where are those? Where are they?
Oh, well, this is the artfulness of right-wing propaganda, right? Because they can take something seemingly neutral, like wearing a mask in a pandemic, and politicize it in insane ways that are totally divorced from reality, but which people will sign on to if they've signed on to the rest of it already.
They politicize it and they culturize it, right? I mean,
because politics is culture for them.
Right. Calling from a 478 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Good afternoon, Sam. This is Jeff in Georgia.
Jeff in Georgia. Long time no hear from. Glad to hear from you.
Thank you, man. I've missed you and everyone. It's good to talk to you.
Hope you're well.
I can't. Well, I could complain. Nobody's doing great.
Right.
But the wolves aren't at my door, so there's that.
Glad to hear it.
I did want to talk a little bit about the protests that have been happening. I wish I had it in me to be funny or charming right now. I really don't. But one thing I wanted to say that a lot of people haven't really framed it this way, and it's not all that's going on. Is that probably since the 70s, but accelerating in the 2000s, really. I'll tell a little story. I'll be 35 next month. I have a college degree. Not to brag, but I was always the kind of kid who was pretty good at school. I wasn't valedictorian or anything, but I made the A's on the test without studying, that kind of thing. And so clever enough that I expected to be doing a bit better in my life by the time I turned 35 than I am, frankly. The reason I don't feel bad about that is not just because I don't really have a choice. I can't sit around feeling sorry for myself all day. And the reason I tell that story is because I think that's kind of how a lot of people my age and younger feel. And how I think it relates to these protests is that we are coming up on a generation, an entire generation of Americans who have come of age in a world in which they have no future. The economy is creating jobs that are service, gig employment. They're aware of our wars and adventurism, disastrous adventurism in the Middle East. They're aware of environmental catastrophe. And there's a real sense that the society in which they live doesn't have anything to offer them. And they have no buy-in for it. And when you have a large number of young, active people who have no reason to trust in the system to do anything for them, the only thing the system has left to offer them after everything else is force, is police state compliance. And I don't want to make it sound like these protests are about the economy or about the pandemic or about the gig economy or anything like that. But I do think they're related, because I think that's what's different about this moment. And that should frighten the ruling class. It really should, even on their own terms. So just a society is not really stable, in my opinion. I don't know what you think about any of that, Sam.
Well, no, I think there's something to that. I mean, I think, I may be over inclined to say that, that generational politics is pretty determinant here. But millennials are the largest generation we have now, essentially, on the playing field. And I think their experience is exactly what you say. I would say in terms of race, too, that their experience has been
even worse.
Even worse. But I think that their expectations are higher, and the dissonance is greater. And I think, you also layer in the idea of like, video, where it becomes completely, there's no room for denial. I think you also layer in the fact that I believe millennials is the first generation where whites are are not the largest cohort of people, or maybe I should say don't make up a majority. Let's put it that way. I think maybe they still have plurality, but and I think that has part of it to do it. I think there's that broad frustration that you're talking about. And I think the fact that they're the biggest generation changes the dynamic in society as to where people's sympathies lie. Because in many respects, even though your generation has gotten shortchanged in terms of economic power, just in terms of sheer numbers, you have a cultural power that I think is beginning to assert itself, and a social power that's beginning to assert itself. And I think, it's going to translate into political power. I genuinely believe that. It's just a question of how long will it take? What will be salvageable at that point? I agree with you. I think there's going to be something very dramatic that takes place over the next, I don't know if it's 5, 10, 15, 20 years, but I think.
And even if I could just say just one thing about Georgia specifically, it's kind of funny. A couple of weeks ago, when the first Black Lives Matter protest really popped off, I saw our governor in a YouTube video that was listed privately, or unlisted, excuse me, so you could only get to it through a link from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution website. It was really weird. It was like 3 minutes long, and he looks like a deer in the headlights.
Yeah.
Brian Kemp looks like a deer in the headlights. He looks freaked out. I would think that he'd get on that TV and start thundering and hollering about, law and order, and we're going to crack heads, and we're not going to tolerate insurrection in the state of Georgia, et cetera, et cetera. And it was not that. He looked genuinely afraid and unsure of the future, as if he realized maybe partly what I realized, which is that the society over which he governs is increasingly unstable. Because this, you've talked a lot about millennials, and that's true, but like, I'm a millennial, and I'm 35 now. So there are people coming of age, literally half my age and they're adults. They'll have the franchise,
yep.
And there are always going to be more of them. And the economy they're inheriting is every bit as terrible as the one that I inherited 10, 15 years ago. But I don't want to bum anyone out. I just want to say that there is change in the wind. I think there's a possibility that things really could actually move in a substantial way, and we shouldn't give up. If you're out there protesting, stay safe, and do your thing for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sam.
Appreciate the call, Jeff. Glad you're safe.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah, we were certainly due for an uprising of some sort. I think CLR James said when the historians look back on such a period, they're not going to ask why people rose up with such ferocity, but what took them so long. And it's not surprising that this uprising would come in through the door of race, because we see capitalist exploitation and white supremacy combining to create an even tougher situation for young Black and brown people in this country than everyone else. But it is also a class struggle. It's all connected, right? And like, I think a lot of the pressure valves that used to exist to tamp down on class struggle, especially among white middle class people, including the very existence of the middle class, are going away. And young white people, more and more so, are realizing that it behooves them much more to side with their fellow workers of various races and genders than it does to side with the white bosses. So,
I don't see this as disconnected from Occupy. I mean, I really do think that that these things build on each other, and I think that Occupy was part of this on some level. That and what happens next this will be part of as well. I mean, I do think that there's a bit of a lineage here. But
oh yeah, Occupy, the WTO protests, Black Lives Matter. I see elements of all of these things being synthesized in what's going on now.
Yep. Here's this is from January 2019. Why is this it
was going viral on Twitter this weekend.
Why was it going viral? Just because it was out there?
Just what's in the conversation now, I think. The videos that are being posted and such.
Yeah, it's oh God. Let's just look at this Tim Scott. I mean, there is Tim Scott, who Mitch McConnell placed in charge of the Republican-led Senate police reform efforts. Tim Scott, of course, is the only African-American Republican senator. And so, of course, he's going to be put in charge of the Republican-led reform efforts. Apparently, he's out there saying that qualified immunity cannot be on the table. Now, qualified immunity, again, is a court-developed legal doctrine that says you cannot sue a police officer or any government official, for that matter, for a constitutional rights infringement, I guess, if there is not specific law that has been developed, either passed or within the context of legal doctrine or court found sort of infractions, I guess, or court developed law, that in this exact same situation, they were held liable. Now, this is a tort proceeding. It's a civil proceeding. It's not a criminal one. But the idea is that if tort lawyers come in, certainly I've talked about it ad nauseum in the context of the of private industry. And for me, it's a second order thing, right? I mean, we should have government should be structuring things in such a way that these things don't happen, or that there's proper accountability. The tort lawyers, in many respects, particularly in this context, civil rights lawyers, they provide this type of almost like a deputized posse. When the government fails to hold these people to account, these guys come in and end up costing a city or a state tens of millions of dollars. And the idea being is that, like, states and cities react to that often, not always. And on top of it, theoretically, it makes the victims of this type of breach not necessarily whole, but it helps. And Democrats in the House came out for a reform of this notion of qualified immunity. The Republicans supposedly are not for it. Here's Tim Scott.
What about the firing? Democrats in particular emphasize that reducing qualified immunity, making it easier to fire bad cops, needs to be in legislation. Are you open to that?
Well, there are two ways that you could deal with that. From the Republican perspective, and the president has sent the signal that qualified immunity is off the table. They see that as a poison pill. On our side, we could use the decertification of officer, except for the law enforcement unions say that's a poison pill. So we're going to have to find a path that helps us reduce misconduct within the officers. But at the same time, we know that any poison pill in legislation means we get nothing done. That sends a wrong signal, perhaps the worst signal right now in America. I think we're going to have legislation that can be negotiated, that gets us to the place where something becomes law that actually makes a difference. That's got to be our goal.
So to be clear, you personally would be open to reducing immunity but not removing it completely?
No, I think there's a way for us to deal with it. Decertification would be a path that I would be interested in looking at. That is a path that has got a roadblock because I don't have the votes on the other side to make that into law. If we do it right, I think we can reduce the number of times that we're dealing with misconduct on the police departments. If we don't do it right, then we'll have the same situation where there is no law. We can do better than that as a nation, and we will.
We spoke with the Attorney General.
All right, just to be clear on what's going on here. The Republicans want to make it about decertifying specific officers so that the accountability is limited to the officers themselves. That it is an acknowledgement or a lack of acknowledgement that there is a problem with the entire police force. That if a couple of cops do this, that it's just really a function of like, oh, we let a couple bad ones in through the filter, as opposed to there is no filter, that we encourage this, that there is no, broadly speaking, no accountability beyond the actions of an individual rather than the context in which those actions take place. Qualified immunity, the other element of it is not just about firing the cops. It's about punishing the institution, holding to account the institution that has allowed and enabled these cops to operate in the way that they're operating. And it goes, theoretically, could go for other government officials. According to Cory Booker, he said on Face the Nation that Mike Braun, Republican from Indiana, told him that qualified immunity is still on the table. So we'll see. I mean, people can say this is nibbling around the edges. I think this is actually a pretty big step, relatively speaking, from what we can expect on a federal level. Because if lawyers are out there and able to cost a municipality $20-30 million in some of these instances, you're going to see more pressure on a local level to actually institute changes to the way that people police that are going to be more meaningful. That's the way that this, I think, works, is that you bank as much of the reform as you can now and use that. It's almost like you're building a jig for a tool where, you're spending part of the time building the tool that's going to allow you to operate the tool properly. So we'll see. Do you know about jigs, Jamie? You doing woodworking?
Not so much. No, I was going to say something about police abolition, but jigs are cool too.
Well, the way is like, how do you get from A to Z? And I think this can take you to G, maybe.
I mean, I've seen some folks I respect saying that the qualified immunity thing doesn't do a whole lot. But it is certainly disturbing that the police unions have the power to stand in the way of something even this small a reform, right? And this is one argument that I would make against police unions and why they should be marginalized from the wider labor movement. Like I've got like a Marxist explanation of why police as an institution are not part of the working class. They're an instrument of class rule. And then I've got a very basic one, which is that they do bad things. Like the proof is in the pudding, right? They're consistently reactionary. They stand in the way of any attempts at reform, let alone, more non-reformist reforms like defunding. And they've been historically used to fight against other unions and put down strikes, and it still happens. So just some thoughts floating around in my head about that.
I mean, if you want to see how they're used against sort of the broader union movement, all you really need to do is look at Wisconsin in 2011. There was an attempt not an attempt, it was a successful one by Walker to basically attack all state and municipal unions, except for the cops. And I think the firefighters, but the firefighters, I remember Madison, they came out for the other union members. All right, let's take one more phone call. Calling from a 415 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, it's Dan from the Bay Area.
Dan from the Bay Area. Welcome to the program. What's on your mind?
I just wanted to say that I called in pretty recently, and Michael Brooks did an impression of Obama, and he thought I was shading him, but I was actually complimenting him because he really does have one of the best Obama impressions. And are you ready for this? My dad told me about a comedian named David Fry who did a really good impersonation of Richard Nixon, and I was wondering if you know who that is.
David Fry of Fry and Lurie fame from Britain?
Yes.
Yes, I do.
No, that's Stephen Fry.
Stephen Fry.
Not Stephen Fry. There's a different. I don't know if it was that one actually. It might be an American guy, but
then I don't know.
Really good impression of Nixon way back in the day. You would have probably been between like 10 or 20, or no, not 10 or 20. Probably you would have been really young when it happened.
Yeah,
and I just
would have
to
been.
say that briefly.
Well, thank you.
But the other thing I was going to talk about is that I believe Crystal and Sagar are elevating Tucker Carlson a little too much, because you point out consistently the time when you were, I think, doing Crossfire, and he went out and smoked a cigarette and said, I don't really care about the Iraq war.
I wasn't doing Crossfire. But I know the person he was doing it with at the time. Yes.
Yeah, but I think they elevate him too much. I mean, I believe that he's a white supremacist and an opportunist and a grifter, and I'm actually getting pretty tired of them elevating him as much as they are.
Yeah, well, I mean, to be honest with you, I don't follow for the most part what other shows do in that respect. But I think anybody elevating Tucker Carlson is doing a disservice to the left, to the working class, to people who are not white. I mean, I don't know what else to tell you. That is I do not think that Tucker Carlson is the class traitor that people must obviously be giving him the sheen of. This is a guy who is, he's in New York or Maine or Florida when he's doing his show. My understanding is he is the heir to a frozen food fortune, which I think, fine. Good for you. But he is not striking me as someone who is a traitor to his class, but is rather, changing his rhetoric like he's done literally in my, in the 15 years that I've been doing this and observing him. He has basically transformed himself at least 4 or 5 times, ranging from, getting in front of CPAC some years ago and saying, conservatives need responsible media, and I'm going to start a new reporting venture, which within like a year was doing stuff like, like, I don't know, like porno queens from Sweden or, want to, cuck all of us or something. I don't know what they were doing, but he has gone through multiple iterations. And I think anybody who is promoting him is not doing so on behalf of issues that are important to the left.
I agree. I also wanted to co-sign every single thing that Jeff in Georgia talked about, because I too I'm a millennial. I'm 26, and I never got my degree like Jeff from Georgia did, but my employment prospects are pretty dim, and the idea that I could achieve any kind of upward mobility going forward is really limited, and it just brings so much, bad feelings, and just there's like no future for me or anybody else who's in my position, and it's really quite depressing.
Well, hopefully there'll be some changes, sooner rather than later, but hang in there, and I appreciate the call.
Thank you.
All right, folks, that's it for our calls, our phone call portion of the show. That noise signifies it. I will do 6 IMs, and then we'll get out of here. Todd from Nova Scotia. Sam, can we get your take on Taibbi piece from over the weekend? I know Michael seems to agree with it, as Dave Rubin. Nathan Robinson provides a good takedown of it in Current Affairs. What do you think? It's kind of bizarre to see Taibbi go the IDW route of railing against campus Marxism, defend cotton, and side with management over labor. I mean, I think there are points in it that I would agree with, but there's also a lot of stuff in there that is, just factually wrong. I know that that Lee, who I'm a fan of, and I've had many times on Ring of Fire. I've probably had him on this show once or twice, but the nature of this show, we don't do as many short reported pieces. I know that he wasn't forced to apologize by The Intercept. He may have been forced in his mind to apologize because he was getting such pushback on Twitter, but Twitter is what Twitter is, and that's a decision that you make. I mean, Lee has the right of free speech. Other people have the right of free speech as well, and respond to it. I mean, you can agree or disagree with the takes. I don't think that that Lee is racist. I think that he, explores these issues and has been doing it consistently. He had other things that were factually wrong in that piece. I think that, and first of all, he's like talking about people criticizing Tom Cotton's op-ed. There was someone really important who didn't read, criticizing Tom Cotton's op-ed for not reading it. There was someone really important who else claimed that they didn't read it. The person who authorized it in the New York Times apparently didn't read it either, which is, it seems like an important thing to cover here. I mean, look, there is no doubt in my mind that there are excesses and responses across the board with a lot of different things that are going on right now that are, not optimal. Okay. Society for many years has built up a debt in various areas by stifling the voices and the experience and discounting the experience of people. That debt accrues, and it's sometimes the blowback of it is sometimes maybe not commensurate with any given offense in that moment, but is a function of these type of offenses not being addressed for decades and generations. And so I think that in terms of like looking around and thinking that that is the most important thing, I disagree. And I think, something like that gets more attention than is probably warranted because it is, there's a contrarianism out there that, used to be slate pitches and now it's not. And so I don't know. I think that bemoaning the fact that journalism is not factually based enough with a piece that has that many factual errors is a little problematic. Some of the ideas in there, though, I mean, I agree with. It's fine. I don't think it's that big of a deal, frankly.
Yeah, it does make me wonder, though, like why he would manipulate the facts like that in order to make some kind of point if he's just, trying to tell the truth about what's going on in the world. And like, I'm sorry, I understand that there are excesses to like the SJWs or whatever, but if that's your bailiwick, if that's the thing you get mad about consistently, I don't trust you, and I don't think that you're on the side of progress. Also,
go ahead.
Like every media outlet has a bias, right? I think some people are just more honest about it than others. Like we obviously have a certain ideological slant when we report on the news at MR. maybe you disagree with me. I don't know. But like, the New York Times certainly has a bias, and they certainly have a range of viewpoints that they find acceptable and ones that they do not, right? So the idea that they are just this purely neutral party that needs to let whatever fascist they want to, scrawl on their pages is false.
All right, of course. I mean, to even cite the New York Times in this is just a bizarre thing to me. I mean, it's not like Tom Cotton does not, he's not in the intellectual dark Senate, right? Like, Tom Cotton has a platform. Tom Cotton's one of the most prominent Republican senators in the country. Tom Cotton does not have the inability to get stuff out there. And the op-ed was riddled. His op-ed was riddled with lies. And so, like, what's the justification? Like, what is the actual complaint here? That people are too shut off from the idea of letting a senator get up there and spew lies in, even if it's an op-ed, in a newspaper that purports to, to save democracy from a failure of facts. I mean, let's be honest. That's just absurd. If you want to say that this Twitter fight with Lee Fong is off, is bad, then just write your opinion piece about that. I mean, it's just like, it literally is the equivalent of like, I can't do the comedy I want to do anymore because people are pissed about it. I'm sorry. Yeah. That's just, so what? So what? The idea that there was not a set of values or opinions that you could express that were not subject to attack is before this. It was just absurd. It's just that they weren't values or opinions that you cared about. Like, it's just, we are going through a transition in our society today where the value set of one group that has dominated for generations is being cast aside. And another value set is making encroachments on that. I don't want to overstate it, but that's what's happening on some level. That's the dynamic. And the people who are losing out from that are complaining. And it's certainly within their rights to complain. But to make it like there's some type of massive structural and definite existential threat to society is absurd. It's absurd. It's just absurd. The excesses of this time will recede, and hopefully, because that's the way all change happens, it's through spikes, and it's going to recede. It's going to be a little bit better than it was before. And you could talk about it in terms of Me Too. And look, I contended at the time, I still contend that Matt was unfairly targeted in the Me Too by Me Too activists, that he was unfairly targeted by broadly people for something that he did not do. And I think that I don't think that he was, I don't think you could accuse him of having a forward-thinking perspective on those issues. And you could criticize him for, at the time having a, vaguely anti-feminist or misogynist. I mean, all of that I think is fair for debate. But he was accused of a lot of things accused by everybody except for people he supposedly did it to, right?
Yeah.
There was no accuser. And so I can understand his sensitivity to this, but he is complaining about journalists not being able to see beyond their own perspective. And he writes that piece from that very perspective of one where he was, in my estimation, unfairly targeted, but he can't get past that. And so he constructs a world in which this is an existential threat. And I think it's unfortunate.
Yeah. I mean, I was satisfied with the reporting around that. I want to make it clear. And I was satisfied with his apology for some of the shitty sexist things that he wrote in his younger years. And I don't want to see him going down the road of the IDW. Also, it's important to note, fascists like Tom Cotton, they don't care about liberal values like freedom of the press. Like, a ton of people canceled their New York Times subscriptions after they ran that op-ed from him. And Tom Cotton, how do you think he feels about that? He's stoked. He's stoked, people. Like, people want to decry Antifa for, like, deplatforming or whatever because it goes against liberal values of openness and freedom of the press and whatnot. But, like, this is how fascists operate. They take advantage of these open liberal systems that they do not believe in to spread fascism and rise to power until eventually freedom of the press is abolished. So just some thoughts on that to consider when decrying freedom of the press or whatever.
All right, 4 more IMs. Ronald J. Bateman. Sam, I just became a member, finally in better financial position. MR has helped my girlfriend and I navigate through these insane times we're living in. Also, it's my birthday today. Can I please get a shofar? Thanks for all you and the crew do. Love you guys. Stay safe. Left is best. Keep the stash. All right. And you get that. Yeah, you got to have like a vote on the stash. I just don't know what to do about it. Rachel was right. Mike from PA and Michael Brooks both lost their effing minds because of their work as Bernie supporters. Thank God, Mike from PA. Thank goodness Mike from PA is back. Hope Michael Brooks has recovered as well. Zephi, I'm not sure what you're referring to. Zephi, the telling irony of the Pennsylvania gerrymandering ruling is that the map the judiciary drew was more favorable to Dems than the ones Dems proposed, but the districts weren't as safe for Dem incumbents. Indeed, yes. I think Mike made that point. Social Jewish warrior. Any chance you can bring someone on from Kentucky into the show to talk about the strange dynamic in the Senate race? There seems to be a huge disconnect between the local view of people in Kentucky and the national view of the establishment. All the Kentucky Democrats have lined up behind Booker, and McGrath seems to be deeply unpopular in Kentucky, especially after she questioned whether people should be out protesting during a pandemic. Listen, I hope you're right. You know, someone claimed that the polling is not good for Booker. I haven't seen any polling. But I've tried to track some down. I haven't found any. Listen, the dynamic of Chuck Schumer promoting Democrats in places that is more about him having not to have to worry about a left flank in his Senate caucus. That is documented and dramatic, and it is not too dissimilar from what like Cuomo does. I mean, I'm really coming around to the idea of like, we need Senate and House leaders who are more to the right than I want to see, just because they're not worried about getting flanked on the left. They can't control that. And so that the left, which is ascendant in these caucuses, hasn't hit a critical mass yet, but it's ascendant, can actually push without having to have the sniping, like you're attacking one of our own type of thing. But we may have a guest on later this week to talk about something like that. HubDub. If you're having any eye issues that require a hospital visit, go to the hospital that has a neuro ICU in your area. Neuro ICU. Okay, thank you. Christo. So maybe not stature of Noam Chomsky's Jamie assessment of Warhol as a vacuous apolitical dunce is wrong in each case. There's plenty of strong far-left political work in his oeuvre. He supported Henry Wallace as a young man, for crying out loud. His public persona aside, there's no contesting his position as one of the most important artists of the last century plus. All right, fair enough. There you go.
I think he's overrated.
And the final IM of the day. Union Robbie 537. It should be added that the waiver that you will not seek medical attention for COVID and instead die like Jesus wants. All right. Folks, see you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie bar. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna